Hey, everybody, getting back into Genesis here with Genesis chapter 23. And man, I tell you guys, you read through this passage and you're just like, this is a head scratcher. Like, what in the world are we supposed to get from this? How is this relevant to our lives? Is this just recording details? It's like oftentimes I remember as a kid, in history class, it's just like, okay, do I really need to know this detail? How is this information about something that happened in that time? Like, how does that have any significance? And I was wrestling with this, and I think that the thing that finally came to mind for me is a couple of things. Number one, is God working even in the ordinary? I think it's really easy to think about, you read all the incredible stories and works of miracles that God does in the Bible, and it's a significant period of time that's crammed into, a lot of pages, but relatively not a lot of information. So you can kind of have the impression that the extraordinary things that happen should be the ordinary things of my life. I completely believe that God can do any and all miracles today. Okay, so don't get me wrong. And I think we should be praying for big miracles from God. But they're miracles. They're not necessarily the ordinary of life. And so we got to be careful that we don't think of the ordinary and the everyday as boring and God's not in them. I think God is in the ordinary. And then the second thing that comes to mind is that, okay, if it's the ordinary everyday, what should I be about? What should I be doing with my life? And I think that what we see Abraham do here is significant. Obviously the death of his wife is a big deal. This is a giant event in the life of Abraham. But what's fascinating about this is that we get one verse that says that she died, and then maybe one or two more verses, maybe just one more verse that says that Abraham mourned. And then you've got how many? Almost 20 verses, 17, 16 verses on a transaction, a real estate deal. So what is God doing there? Why is the big thing from Abraham's life tiny, but what's accentuated would be the details of how he went about it? Nobody, when if you go to a funeral, they don't talk about, all the transactions of, like, we bought the plot for the burial and the headstone details we did. You talk about the person's life and you talk about their memory and what they meant to you. But this isn't a story about Abraham. This is a story about what God is doing. What God is doing throughout time, his redemptive work. Remember the big problem, the problem of sin, what has separated us from God. The whole story is about God's story of love to bring us back into the presence of God. And I think what we see here is a man, Abraham, in the ordinary of life, even, the ordinary of death, and the actions that he's taking in line with the promises of God. You see, God promised the land that he's standing on, and Abraham is making the effort and doing the things that he can do within his power to begin to operate within that promise that God. He's not achieving the promises of God, but you see in the ordinary, God beginning to fulfill the promise that he has. I think there's some big things that we can glean from that, but we need to be reminded first of the promises that Abraham has been given. Let me walk you through some verses here I think will really help you understand it. Back in Genesis 13, the Lord said to Abraham after Lot had separated from him, he said, lift up your eyes, look from the place where you are. And by the way, that place here in Genesis 13 is the same place where he bought this land at Hebron. He said, place where you are, look northward and southward and eastward and westward. I mean, this is like basically everywhere is what he's saying. For all the land that you shall see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that no one can count the dust of the earth. Your offspring also can be counted. And they'll be reminded that this includes us. Galatians 3:29. If you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. I am a part of Abram's offspring, because I believe the gospel of Jesus Christ. I am in Christ through faith. So when it talks about blessing the entire world through his offspring, he means not only that I will be blessed because I'm part of the world, but also because I'm now part of his offspring, that I will also now be a blessing to the world, to those around us. And let me just highlight this passage from Psalm 107. He says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so." If you've put your faith in Jesus Christ, then you are redeemed. You are in Christ, whom he has redeemed from trouble. That's me. That's anyone who's put their faith in Jesus. And gathered in from the lands, and listen to this, from the east and from the west and from the north and from the south. Some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. Friends, if you used to not believe in Jesus Christ and his gospel and you now do, then this is describing you. This is what God has done. And he led them by a straight way till they reached a city to dwell in. And then jump ahead now, Hebrews 11. Listen to this. It says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place where he was to receive his inheritance." So God said, "Hey, I'm going to show you this new place." And he went. That was a step of faith. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land. In Genesis chapter 3, he describes himself as a foreigner, as a sojourner, living in tents with Isaac, that's his son, Jacob, that's his grandson, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Guys, this is all metaphorical language. There is a city that God is building, that he's looking forward in faith. So when he puts down that money for that plot, it is in faith, believing that this is land that God has already promised me. This is what God is doing. For me to give up this money and even to overpay for it, which is, I think, a significant detail here, because we know that David, when David bought the threshing floor that became the spot where the tabernacle and then the temple was built, David only paid 50 shekels for that spot of land. That's much more prime real estate than this one. Abraham is willing to overpay even for something that he knows that God is going to do. There's nothing temporary of this world, money, that he is unwilling to give up for something that is eternal, which is God's promise for a city. Revelation 21. "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man.'" Guys, this is like getting back into the garden, except the difference is that in the garden, God visited Adam and Eve. This future city is a place where we live together with God. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. Jump down a few more verses, and he's describing this city. Huge walls, huge city. On the east, it has 3 gates. On the north, 3 gates. On the south, 3 gates. And on the west, 3 gates. Guys, that eastward, westward, northward, southward, all directions idea in Hebron, linked together with Psalm 107, the city of Hebrews 11 that Abraham in faith is looking forward to, all metaphorically brought together again in the new city, in the new heavens and new earth that God is promising for the one day when all the evil, all the wrong, everything will be not only fully redeemed, but also 100% restored. Guys, This is the mission of God. This is what he's doing. And what I see in Abraham is a guy who he's not buying favor from God. He's not, putting down a down payment in order to get something from God. No, he's just basically saying, okay, this is what God is doing in the world, and I'm pushing all in. I am taking what I have, and I'm going all in on what God is doing. Guys, if you give up something you can't keep, like money, in order to gain something that you can't lose, the promises of God, that is a great deal. And I think, and to me, that's the key that jumped out to me for this passage is how much he paid for that land. And I've got a number of friends from a church up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They were telling me the story about, because in that area they have tons of Amish people. And, Amish culture is huge up in Lancaster. And the Amish are surprisingly very, very wealthy. They've got a lot of cash. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the bottom line is, he was telling me, was that if there's like a farm auction, like a big farm is going up for sale, and they'll have a big auction for it. And he said that if the Amish come to an auction, then you can forget it if you were hoping to buy that land, because they've got tons of cash. And he said the Amish, they don't mind overpaying for a property. And the reason they don't mind overpaying for a property is because their plan to just keep it. It's not the property itself is not an investment for them. And I think that's what you see happening here with Abraham. When most of us probably live in homes that we're not necessarily thinking of as our long-term home. Like this home that I'm in right here, I don't anticipate living in this house my entire life. And I certainly don't anticipate, giving it to my children as an inheritance and they'll live there and then so on and so forth. When you buy a property today, you don't want to overpay for it because you're hoping to get your money back out of it when you sell it, right? So if I way overpay for a property, then it's hard to get out of it because I'm stuck and nobody will pay what I paid, or unless I want to take a loss, and I'm willing to do that. And so what Abraham here is doing is he's saying, I don't really care if I'm overpaying for this property because God's already promised this property to me. And I think the fact that he can trust all that money to just give it away, and he's even trusting that the in perpetuity agreement that he's making with these people, that God's going to be the one that actually enforces that, because not long after this he's going to be gone, and then his children, and so on, right? This is an act of faith in the promise that God has made. And guys, I think that the thing for us to see is, what is the act of faith steps that we need to be taking in line with the promises that God has given us. A big promise that stands out for me is the promise that Jesus said that I will build my church and the gates of hell will not stand against it. That reminds me so much. I mentioned this last week of the promise that God made to Abraham, where he said, you will possess the gates of your enemies. Guys, God is on a mission in this world. His kingdom is coming. It has come. And more of this world is becoming in line with his kingdom, guys. And we join his kingdom and we invite other people to be a part of his kingdom. And I think there's also a lot of things that you can glean from this passage in terms of how we're interacting with the world around us. What you see from Abraham is incredible kindness and grace and respect and honor that he shows to the people around him. I mean, even the fact that he's willing to overpay for something that they're selling to him. He doesn't mind what he does in their favor because he cares more about the mission of God and what God is doing. And guys, what God is doing is redeeming people to himself and building his kingdom. Jesus said, just as the Father sent me, I am sending you. And the thing that I really want to encourage you guys in is this idea of prayer. Guys, we need to be in prayer for the people that are right around us. The east, the west, the north, the south. The neighbors that are next door to you, that live, across the street from you. A passage that really jumps out to me is Matthew 9:36-38. And it says that Jesus saw the crowds and he felt compassion for them because they were helpless and harassed, like sheep without a shepherd. And he turned to his disciples and he said, see that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest that he would send out laborers into his harvest. Guys, that is a prayer that I'm praying nearly every single day. Earnestly that God would raise up laborers. I pray that God would make me a laborer for his harvest. This is what God's working in. So what do I care about giving up what I can't keep in order to enjoy and gain what God is doing? To be a part of what God is doing. I want to have eyes to see people the way he sees them, with compassion and care for them. Guys, be praying for them. And then I want us to also be very practical in that prayer and very deliberate, intentional in it, in our intentional communities, guys. And what I really encourage you guys in is to maybe, make a map of the people that are right around you guys. Do that as a family. Maybe do it as an intentional community. Take a particular street and say, we are going to intentionally pray for all the people on this street. And maybe go on prayer walks. And then pray for each household, each person that you know in those homes. Thank God for them, that they're there. Praise him for what you see of God's image on them. Ask God for ways that you can practically show them the love of Jesus. Ask God to open up doors that you can give the gospel to them. And then here's the key. I want you guys to listen. Pause, wait. Listen to God. What is he saying to you? What is he encouraging you in? Maybe make notes on that. Share that with one another. And then start to act in obedience to that. It might be just simple things like, I'm going to offer to rake this person's yard, or help them spread this mulch. Or maybe we'll have them over for dinner. Or maybe just ask them how's it going, and ask them to tell you about their life, to learn their story. Guys, let's be intentional about prayer for the people around us. And then I want to encourage you guys to share with one another how God's working. Now, guys, it doesn't have to be prayer walks. It doesn't have to be the direct next door neighbors, but who are the people that God brings into to mind for you? And share that with one another. Let's be accountable to one another. Encourage one another with the stories of how God's working, how God's impressing on us when we listen to him, how we're being obedient to them. And then I hope to see how God's going to work through that. That's the ordinary, the everyday of life, guys. And I'm willing to take the things that I can't keep, like 400 shekels of silver. Take the things that I cannot keep and invest it into the eternal, into the kingdom, the things that I cannot lose. That God has promised that the gates of hell will not stand against his church. Guys, we are active and moving, guys, in kindness and love and generosity, all those kinds of things bathed into it. But to me, that's what I'm seeing from this passage, is that God working through a man of faith in the ordinary kinds of things of life. I hope that's encouraging, guys. I hope that this makes sense to you. And again, I want to encourage you guys to listen. Listen to Jesus. Do what he says. And remember that you are loved.